Hello, and welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast, the podcast where we talk about what it means to be an alpha male in this modern society, in this modern world, where there's so many attacks on strong, dominant men. But where we get together in this virtual tribe and we don't apologize for what God made us in His very own image, strong, dominant, brave, in control alpha males. So let us gather together today in this virtual tribe and strengthen each other. I'm going to skip the normal housekeeping stuff today. I'm going to skip the normal bio stuff today. If you've listened before, then you've heard it. And if you haven't, don't concern yourself with it. Hopefully become a long-time listener. Today, I'm going to pose one, maybe two very simple, basic questions. Can you feed yourself? Can you feed yourself? Can you protect yourself? Now, if you've listened before, first and foremost, I am a Christian, a follower of God, a servant of God, a follower of Jesus Christ. I trust God to take care of me. I trust God. God is my strength. My God supplies all my needs. Likewise, Noah also trusted God. Noah still had to build the ark. Noah still had to get prepared. Likewise, if you know the parable of the virgins waiting for the bridegroom, some were prepared and some weren't. And the ones that weren't prepared, they asked the other ones to help them. And Jesus tells this parable. Does he say, oh yeah, share and help out the others who didn't prepare? In fact, no, when the bridegroom comes, the ones that weren't prepared are shut out. And I'm not telling you not to help people. In fact, we'll get to that later on in this episode. But what I'm saying in those examples is that God calls His people to prepare. How many times does Jesus say, watch and be ready? So I pose the question, can you feed yourself? Now, you don't have to be a Christian to listen to this. I make no apologies for this being a sort of ministry for strong, dominant men. But you don't have to be a Christian to listen to this message. Can you feed yourself? Even if you're not a student of the Bible, if you're a student of history, if you're a student of science, one thing the Bible, history, science, they all agree on is that this is a very out of the ordinary, let's say, time and place in the story of man. In that it's very unusual that you can just go to the store, the average person can go to the store and pick out a variety and much more food than they need. And a lot of times more than what's healthy for them. We live, especially if you're listening to this in the Western world, in America and Europe and first world nations, where there is an overabundance of food for the common man, where you can at any time, likely 3 o'clock in the morning, if you live anywhere near a city, you could drive into a city and get food. You can just go to the store anytime you want and get food for in and of themselves worthless pieces of paper. But that's very unusual throughout the human story. So what if you can't? What if all those random numbers and zeros in your bank account one day just went away? What if that paper or cloth money that you have one day just nobody wanted it? What if one day you went to a store and there was no food? That would not be unheard of in the story of humankind. In fact, it would be the norm. In that seemingly normal environment, I ask again, can you feed yourself? Now, right now, even with food prices going up, it's easy to store food. So I would encourage you to do so. How many times in the Bible is there a famine in the land? How many times throughout history has there been famine? You may complain about food prices now going up, but food prices still, as far as throughout history, are far more affordable than they usually are. Think about what you randomly spend on Amazon or whatever on stuff that a year from now you probably won't even need or remember that you even bought. Are you putting away food for when the time may come when you just go to the store and there is none? And I don't know what the future holds, and I'm not a prophet. I'm not prophesying here. I'm just saying if you study any of these things, you'll know that it's a possibility. When's the day or the hour? I don't know. That's kind of the point. So watch and be ready. Maybe instead of buying a bunch of frivolous stuff that you don't need or will forget about in a week or a month or a year, put away food that will last. Instead of going to the store and buying 1 can of chili or 1 can of beef stew, whatever you eat, buy 2. Or wait till they're on sale and buy 4 and put them away and eat the oldest ones first. Maybe buy a couple of bags of pasta and put them in the back of the closet. Start there. You may complain about food prices, but what does a 20-pound bag of rice cost? It's ridiculously affordable if you think about it, even now. What do you think that bag of rice is going to be worth, and what do you think people are going to do to get food if you can't just go to the store and get it? Rice, beans, corn, wheat. These are things I honestly don't generally eat day to day. I don't think they're super healthy for you. I'm a fat and protein kind of guy, have been long before keto was even a word that I heard. But in a survival situation, you better believe that I have that stuff stored up. Even me, if you've listened long enough, you know that I'm kind of a nomad and I live in 150 square feet. At least that's what my wife says. With my wife, myself, and our probably by now 100-pound hound dog. But even I store this stuff. So, why? If you're not storing it, then why? I even keep quite a bit of food in my vehicle. That's the reason, one of the reasons we as humans cultivated grain, because it stores. That was the stuff you ate in the winter when you couldn't get fresh food. It stores a long time. I've heard this, and I haven't verified it for myself, but I've heard several times in several different places that they found, wheat and grain even in Egyptian tombs that were still good. Why not store it up for a time of famine? And hopefully that time never comes, but if it does, at least you have it. And don't just rely on that. I imagine a lot of people that listen to this are into survival, into preparedness, whatever you want to call it. I like to call it watching and being ready for whatever's coming. But you hear a lot of this like, oh yeah, I've got, snare wire and I've got guns and ammo. And if you've heard my bio before, you know that I'm into guns and ammo. Been a professional gunfighter most of my adult life, and I know my way around a gun by God's grace. I've been a professional hunter and guide. I've hunted ever since I was a young child for food. But even I don't want to rely on that strictly. If you look at like the Great Depression, which things can get far, far worse than that, a lot of the game animals were hunted near to extinction east of the Mississippi River where the population density is high. And that was in the 1930s. Population's way higher now. I think that should be part of your survival strategy, but not the only part. If you have never snared an animal, if you don't know how to set a snare and catch dinner, you think you're going to rely on that when you've been 3 days without food? You're just going to go out and just randomly snare something? Trapping is a skill that needs to be cultivated and maintained. You're not just going to throw out a snare and just expect to eat dinner that night. That's not really how that works. You got to know what you're doing. It's a skill. Likewise, hunting is a skill. If you go to your city park and see a squirrel and think, oh yeah, if things get tough, I'll just shoot a squirrel. If you ever go out in the wild to where, animals are accustomed to being food for other animals and for people, you'll know that it's not as easy as that. With that being said, I think you should have many ways of getting food, of feeding yourself, and those should include trapping and hunting. So I'm saying not to not do that. I'm saying to do that now, not just plan on it having never done it. That's kind of ridiculous. That's, having a gun and ammo and think you're going to be able to hunt when things get really bad is kind of like never learning to drive, but having a car in your driveway that you don't maintain and have never learned how to drive. But you're like, oh, if things get real bad, if I get really hurt, I'll drive to the hospital. I'll learn to drive then. If things get really bad, that's probably not the time to learn how to hunt or trap. Probably should be doing that now, or at least know how to do that now. You don't want to have to learn to drive when you need to get to the hospital. You don't want to learn to hunt when you're starving to death. Do that now. Learn to hunt. Learn to trap. One of the things that I like to do is forage. I like going out with myself or my wife, and even in the deserts of Arizona where I live, going and foraging food, knowing what plants I can eat, what plants I can't, finding new plants, researching them, figure out what I can do with them. If I can do that in the deserts of Arizona and the deserts of Nevada and things like that, you can likely do that wherever you are. And again, I don't need to do that now. My wife and I, by God's grace, make a good income, but we still go out and do it. We still go out and find natural raw foods and eat them. I still go out and hack down agave and roast agave heart and roast agave leaves. We still go out and make our own wine and our own jam and our own things like that. Even though like I said, we make, by God's grace, a fine income. If food went up 10 times, we'd still be able to buy it. But we still go out and do that now. One, because it's fun and it's healthy. And two, because you may not always be able to go to the store and buy food. Forget about if it costs 10 times what it costs now. What if it's just not there? If you look at the rationing that went on in World War I and World War II, I'm not a geopolitical scientist, but things seem to be a lot more intertwined and interwoven, especially on the global market, like the global wheat market, the global corn market, than they were 50 or 100 years ago. So things that happen in other places may affect us far more than they used to. And if you think that can't happen here, what do you base that on? Certainly not history, certainly not science, certainly not the Bible. You may just not want to admit that it can happen here, but you can't really base that on anything sound, I don't think. Other skills include gardening and growing stuff, and I have done this before, but as I said, I'm kind of a nomad, so this is one I am not super well versed in. Many of you listening may be far better at growing things than I am. My young nephew, who's an Eagle Scout, he loves to grow stuff. He lives in the Mid-Atlantic, and he grows pineapple in his room in his bedroom. I've grown beans and lentils and things like that before, Jerusalem artichoke. But again, I'm a nomad. I generally don't plan on staying one place very long, so I'm a stranger and a pilgrim on the earth. I don't know where I'm going to be in the next little bit. But that's a great skill to have if you plan on hopefully staying in one place. That's a great skill to have, knowing how to grow things and grow food and having seeds stored up. One, even if for times don't get bad, it's still better and still healthier than what you're probably going to buy at the store, sprayed in pesticides and genetically modified and a bunch of other stuff. Fishing's another one. One thing I don't generally mention in the bio is I was a fisherman. I still fish for fun, but I was a commercial fisherman when I was younger with my father. He's a commercial fisherman. My father's father was a commercial fisherman. There's a far difference between fishing for the most amount of fish you can catch to feed yourself and other people versus fishing for sport. Fishing for sport is fun, and I do enjoy it, but it's more a cultural thing. If you look at the amount of money you spend on gas and towing a boat to a place and all that stuff, that's not really feasible for getting food. It's a sport. That's why it's called sport fishing. I'm talking about fishing for food, like with a net, with a cast net, with a trot line, if you've never done that. Jug fishing. Learn those kind of skills. I love, throwing a topwater bait for bass on a beautiful lake. But that's not really good for food, if I'm planning on that for food. Much better to set a trot line and do a bunch of other stuff what I have to do during the day and come back and harvest a bunch of fish. These are just things to think about, and they may or may not all apply to you. Again, I say I live in the deserts of Arizona. I'm probably not setting a trot line where I am, which I'd be remiss if I didn't mention clean water. Bad sanitation and dirty water kill a lot of people in wars and in natural disasters and in a lot of third world countries. And if you're a first world country now, don't think that it can't get that where you are. It's a great thing in modern society where you can just turn on the faucet and clean. And by I mean clean, like it's not going to kill you to drink it. I don't think it's the best water if it's city water. But where you can just turn on a faucet and clean running water comes out. But what if it doesn't? Even if you have a well, if there's no power, your well pump's not pumping water unless you have a manual backup. What if you just turn on the faucet and water doesn't come out? Or what if that water isn't clean? What if the city infrastructure goes to crap and that water that come out is not safe to drink? Flint, Michigan, anybody? Can you purify your own water? Can you get your own water? Is that a thing that you can do? Do you have a little bit of clean water stored up? And this is cheap and easy. Just take not actual gallons of water, because those containers generally aren't robust, but 2-liter soda bottles of stuff you shouldn't be drinking anyway, or the tea bottles, anything that's acidic or pressurized. Rinse those out. Put water in those to at least get you in the interim where you can get your own fresh water again. But do you have any of that stored up? What if you go to the store and there's no food? What if you turn on the faucet and there's no water? That's not unheard of. Again, it's a very unusual thing that most people can just go turn on a faucet and get clean water. That's not a norm. You think that can't go away? Look at Rome. Rome had hot and cold, clean running water. The Roman system, it went through changes, but let's say for argument's sake it lasted 1,000 years. And then one day it wasn't there. And then there were the Dark Ages. There was no running water anymore. There was hundreds of years without sanitation and clean running water. That's what they're called, the Dark Ages. Those Romans had gone generation after generation after generation of just any time they wanted, having clean running water, even having access to hot water. And then one day, they didn't. Again, if you're a student of history, it's happened before. What makes you think it can't happen again? And I hope that it doesn't. I hope that you never need it. But what's really the downside to getting a good, robust container and putting clean water in it? As I said, I'm kind of a fat and protein kind of guy. I like to hunt and kill my own food. Although, where I live now in Arizona, there's kind of a lottery to hunt elk and things like that, which I don't like, but I submit to governing authorities. But I still like to eat fat and protein. So one of the things that I store, especially since I'm a nomad, is peanut butter. Peanut butter is a very high-calorie food. It's fat and it's protein. It has a ton of calories, especially for the amount of space that it takes up. And a funny story is that for my birthday present this year to myself, I bought a 45-pound tub, 35-pound tub, a giant tub of peanut butter, and a bunch of 5-pound tubs of peanut butter for myself for my birthday. My wife, because we're not into buying stuff that we're not going to use or don't need, she bought me a 15-pound tub of peanut butter for my birthday, thinking that was a big tub. And then her mom also bought us peanut butter for my birthday. So I had something like, not counting the peanut butter that we already had, something like 89 pounds of peanut butter for my birthday. And I'm sure eventually, by God's grace, I'll live long enough to eat that peanut butter. I eat a lot of peanut butter. And what's the downside of that? I don't see the cost of food or peanut butter going down anytime in the near future. So it's kind of like giving myself a raise or giving yourself a raise, especially if you buy food that you're going to eat eventually anyway. I've got, 30-something pounds of peanut butter sitting behind me right now in the car. There's really no downside to that. I have, water stored up in the car. What's the downside of that? If I decide one day I just want to get in my Hummer for whatever reason, because I need to or just for recreation, I want to head up into the mountains, I've got enough food and water to last me probably a year, even if I don't kill anything. And like I said, I've been a professional hunter and guide. I've hunted for food since I was a kid. But it's a good supplemental. I'm not telling you to do what I do. I'm not telling you to have, a 35-pound tub of peanut butter behind the driver's seat of your car. I'm just telling you to think about, what if you go to the store one day and there's no food? What if there's a little bit of food and people are rioting and killing each other over it? People kill each other over food all the time. Wars are generally fought over resources. What do you think people will do who are starving for a bag of rice? I'm just telling you to think about these things. I'm just telling you to be a little bit like Noah and be prepared. So men, not even going to edit that out. Be circumspect. Be circumspect and think about these things. Try and prove me wrong on this if you don't want to agree, if you have a knee-jerk reaction against this. But back it up with the Bible, with history, with science. Again, this is one place they all agree. Famines are a thing. Civilizations collapse. That's a thing that happens. Likewise with that, can you protect yourself? And I'm not going to get deep into that today because we do whole podcasts on that. Maybe that'll be a whole nother episode. But, if you have a bunch of food, can you keep it? And if food's really that scarce, you don't think that people are going to be looking hard for food to take it away from people that have it? Again, look to other examples of this and you'll see that it's true. And I said I'd get to sharing and stuff. Part of the food that I set aside, I have for tithing. I think it's part of our commission as men, as alpha males, as followers of God, to have some set apart for orphans and widows, for priests, to have part of that set aside, and I have part of my food marked for that. I would encourage you to do the same. What kind of alpha male wouldn't take care of a widow or an orphan because you're too lazy now to prepare? You didn't have something set aside for them as well. With that, man, I think we've got enough to think about on this episode, so I'll probably leave it there. I talked a lot about one of my major food groups, which is peanut butter. For tactical tip of the day, one of my favorite recipes. I don't know if I've shared it with you guys before, but a good way to make a good, like Middle Eastern, Mediterranean-ish style of curry. Take a fine cut of meat and take some oil. Get your oil nice and hot. One of the keys to cooking meat well is to cook it hot and fast so it doesn't get all dry and nasty. But cook it hot and fast, whether that's elk or whether that's beef or lamb or anything like that. Get the temperature nice and hot, some good hot oil. Throw your meat in there. Throw your curry in there. Make it as spicy as you want. Maybe some ghost pepper, maybe some red pepper at the end. Don't put it in there when you're frying it because you're going to pretty much make, a gas chamber in your kitchen. But get a good curry base, which is basically get some good hot oil, chop up some onions, throw it in there. Maybe some other small vegetables if you want, peppers or whatever. Not the super hot peppers, again, wait till the end for those. Then put in your curry and put in your meat. And then right at the very end while it's still hot, not before because you'll burn it, throw in a giant scoop of peanut butter. I'd say no more than 25% of the rest of the recipe and mix it in there. And then put the rest of your hot spices on the top and some salt. And you have peanut butter curry. You can eat it just like it is. We're talking about storing rice and things like that. You can eat it over a bed of rice if you eat rice. But if you have ever had peanut butter curry, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't and you like good, delicious red meat, or I guess even chicken, and you like peanut butter, you're welcome for that recipe. For the tactical verse of the day, talking about being able to feed yourself and others, I'll go to James. What does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith and does not have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warm and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? Again, are you ready? Can you feed yourself? Can you feed those that need it? Are you ready for that? Are you watching and being ready? And talking about famine, let us look to the book of Revelation. Then I heard something that sounded like a voice coming from the middle of the four living creatures. The voice said, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay, and do not damage the oil and wine." Now, if that's coming, you can get a lot more than a quart of wheat for a day's wages right now if you make what most people consider even a minimum wage. Again, I say watch and be ready. Thanks for listening, men, and have a blessed day.